Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, a guest that I've had many requests to get on. People say, hey, get Celente on. Yes, I've tipped you off to who I have on. Gerald Celente, publisher of the Trends Journal, and he is the director of the Trends Research Center. Gerald Celente, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Always wonderful being on with you, Greg.
Well, wonderful having you on. Unfortunately, the subjects we're going to talk about are pretty rough. The possibility of war, which almost paid off a couple of weeks ago in Syria. I mean, Vladimir Putin wrote this op-ed piece, and everybody said it was some insulting thing, which I didn't get that. I was thinking he's warning of a wider war, the line about it would go far beyond the borders of Syria. And I don't think people were totally grasping, how close we were to WW3. What say you, sir?
Well, as you know, of our top trends for 2013, the first one was war. And that's where the United States was obviously going with all of this. And what's very interesting to see and to watch was what happened in the UK, where the Parliament said no. And then people say, you Americans are a bunch of stupid people. We're not that stupid. What, over 70% of the people were against this war. Obama saw that Congress was going to not support his push for war. And then Putin's message that he wrote in the op-ed piece in the New York Times, that was just more fuel on the cooling, I should say, water on the fire of war that cooled it down. And this is unprecedented, by the way. I've been around a long time. I remember as a kid in high school when the Cuban Missile Crisis broke out. I've never seen amateur hour as we saw in America with the White House, with John Kerry, with the Secretary of Defense, with the Senate. It was the presidential reality show and amateur hour all wrapped up into one. Never have I seen such a poor performance as illustrated by our Commander-in-Chief and Secretary of State?
I mean, he, started out, a year ago, Assad must go, remember that? And then the red line, which he said, well, the world painted that red line. But then, as he's got this deal with the Russians, and I wanted to get your take on this, which I thought was kind of odd, and it really kind of got glossed over, a story in the press was just like, was that he basically threatened Iran in not so, veiled terms, that they should better watch out. They shouldn't read more into this than what they should. I just thought that, you just avoided war in Syria, and you're, sticking your finger in the eye of the new president of Iran?
Yeah, I'm telling you, these people say, what's making them do that? How about, let's call them who they are. These are sociopaths and psychopaths. If anybody spent any time, as I did, watching the Senate hearings and the House hearings, where the administration was trying to sell this war, as I said, it was amateur hour. And the only way they get away with it, it was kind of like being in high school and listening to the principal and a couple of teachers lecturing the students. So there's nothing behind this. And the reality is, as I saw it, is that Syria said, listen, we're a tiny little country. We can't match the Americans militarily. And Iran's saying, now wait a minute, we're not that small and we're pretty militarily sophisticated. And then there's Russia, let anyone forget, the Cold War went on for what, 2 decades or more, that if Russia got involved in this, this is full-blown war. And as we used to say in the Bronx, payback's a bitch. And both Iran and Syria promised payback, but not payback in the traditional terms. Greg, in 2000, I was brought down to Virginia Military Institute, VMI. I had just written Trends 2000 a few years earlier. And I was asked to do a keynote speech on New Millennium Warfare. In the audience were the generals, many of them, top generals in the United States, including General Anthony Zinni. And remember, I'm the keynote speaker being brought down there to talk about New Millennium Warfare. And you know how they say the generals are always fighting the last war? If war breaks out between the United States and Syria, you're going to start seeing a very different kind of war. Now, let's put this in perspective. Go back to April, the Boston Marathon bombing. They closed down 100 square miles to hunt for a 19-year-old kid. Business was out of business. They stopped train service between Boston and New York. You just saw what happened down at the Navy shipyard in Washington. They closed down the Senate, and they stopped flights from coming in and leaving Reagan International Airport. Suppose a dirty bomb goes off in D.C., L.A., or New York. Suppose biological warfare breaks out in San Francisco or Atlanta. The economy crashes. They can't cope with finding a 19-year-old kid. Could you imagine if something serious happened? America is over its head. They get involved in another foreign conflict. Look who they're beating up. They beat up Panama. Oh, they had a tough job over there in Grenada. Hey, wait a minute. Didn't America lose in Iraq? Yeah, that's right. We lost. Look what happened in Afghanistan. America lost the war. Look what happened in Vietnam. Well, if we only dropped an atom bomb on them, maybe we would have won. And America lost the Korean War. That's right. They never signed a truce. There was never, all it is a ceasefire. If America goes to war with Syria and Iran, it's the beginning of World War III. Dirty bombs, suitcase-sized nukes, weapons of mass destruction. It's hell on earth.
Well, and I wanted to bring my next question. I wanted to roll in the economy. So, you don't think it's over in the Middle East. It's just, I put in my weekly news wrap-up last week that it was, for now, peaceful, but it's not over. But I'm not a top trends researcher, and, I don't, go through all the things that you go through. Is it over, or are they bound and determined to have a war?
They're bound and determined to have a war. The sarin gas had nothing to do with this. You've been getting the trends journals for years. We've been writing in detail the lies that they've been saying about Syria using gas going back for almost 2 years. Pick up the Winter Trends Journal, how they were locking the Syrians, were locking this stuff onto bombs, and they were going to explode them at any moment. It's all propaganda. And by the way, who made the United States the moral authority about using weapons of mass destruction? Just for a little bit of history here. How about 2 atom bombs going off, one in Nagasaki and one in Hiroshima? How about the tons of napalm and Agent Orange that the United States dumped on the Vietnamese people as they slaughtered 3 million of them? How about all of the white phosphorus and depleted uranium that the United States has dumped throughout Iraq and Afghanistan? Not to mention, of course, because you're not allowed to, what the Israelis have also done in dumping white phosphorus on the Palestinians and Lebanese. That's okay. I guess all of those are FDA approved. But don't use sarin gas. Don't use, come on, how World War II, mustard gas, World War I. This is a lot of baloney to kind of, just like they lied about the first Gulf War. You remember, they hired this woman that was brought into Washington by one of the big PR firms to say how the Iraqis were going into hospitals and bayoneting babies in incubators. Remember that big lie? Remember the big lie about the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had? Hey, Greg, did you forget the big lie about the Gulf of Tonkin that never happened the way they said it? How many more times do Americans have to be lied to before they stop believing in this crap? Read my lips, no new taxes. I didn't have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. I smoked, but I didn't inhale. Just keep going, and they still believe they're commanders and chief.
Well, how do you think they start this? Is it going to be by accident? Is it going to be a false flag? We going to wake up one morning and find out Iran's been hit? Are they going to run into one of our ships? Are we going to run into one of theirs? I mean, what is your brief? I know you're not a fortune teller, but what do you think? How do you think if they're bound and determined to have war? How do you think they're going to try to get a war?
My best guess, and it's only a guess, all of the ones you said are all possibilities. The other one to throw into the equation is something going on with Israel. And then you're going to see, everybody, if Israel gets involved, you're going to hear all the congressmen and senators and the president all throw their support behind Israel. I think Israel's the wild card in the game. And let us not forget that Israel bombed Syria twice in the last year.
Yes, they did. They took out the Fatah 110 missiles, and then they had a submarine attack on some other missiles that the Russians were bringing. And so, yes.
We don't know what they did. That's what they told us.
Okay.
The other reports were coming in was that they were bombing barracks where they had soldiers and that were part of the elite brigade of the Syrians. There's nothing that they say that I believe. But my best guess, as I said, it could be a false flag. Syria launched an attack against Israel. Something like that, a gas attack. And, something along those lines. But I believe Israel's the wild card in this wild game of madness that the sociopaths and psychopaths are playing.
Okay, and then I want to bring it back closer to home because I know you follow not just the Middle East, you follow all kinds of trends. And the two big ones I'm hitting on here is war and the economy. And here we have last week, Ben Bernanke, he had this tease of taper, we're going to cut back. The consensus said, I don't know who these people, the people that I talked to said there's no way they're going to cut this back. And sure enough, we're going to keep pumping out money. If this trend keeps going on, and of course you are one of the top trends people in the world, if not the country, but at least the world. But anyway, if this keeps going on, what happens? I mean, is our money going to turn into confetti?
It is, yeah, exactly. They're devaluing the currency. You just can't keep this going on. Look what happened with the fear that they were going to raise. They were going to cut back on tapering, but stop buying those mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. You saw all of a sudden the 30-year rate on mortgages went up 1%. All of a sudden refis and the new purchases on homes started to decline rapidly. Banks like Wells Fargo and others started firing people because the refis were so low. So what this is an interest rate recovery. Again, the people you're talking to are 100% correct. They cannot stop tapering without stopping the fake recovery. So let's look at this again in another light. I believe they are going to start tapering because, as just you said, they're turning the currency into confetti. And they have to stop at some point. Oh, and by the way, you also saw what it did to all the international markets, the emerging markets, because all the hot money from the tapering has been going over to pump up these other economies. And now when the tapering and the interest rates went up, the money started pouring out of those economies. So they have to save those too. But at some point it has to stop. My best forecast that I could give on this, and I believe it, they are going to start tapering, but in 2014. They're not going to risk the holiday shopping because Wall Street will go into a panic. Retail sales are already very weak. If they had more panic during this time of the year going into the holiday season, bam, that little 2% rise, maybe 1.8% GDP increase goes down to almost nothing or negative. So that, to me, is what they're looking at. They're looking at the real numbers, and the real numbers stink. So I believe tapering is going to have to happen at some point, and when it does, I believe it's going to be in 2014.
My mom has a farm. My family has a farm in Missouri. And I was thinking to myself, well, I don't know if they're going to try to crash the economy. I don't think they're going to try to anyway. I don't think they're going to do any tapering because they got to get through the harvest season. I mean, there's billions of bushels of grain that have to be taken in, and I think they're worried about that. And of course, when FDR did his closing the banks was in March, or I think it was March. And
You're
so
right.
I think that was a strategic time. Are you looking at the same thing repeating, the trend repeating? And if they do something, it'll be February or March after the holiday season, before, in the middle of winter?
That's right. We're on the same page. You're looking at, the farms. I wasn't thinking of that. And, I was thinking of retail sales. Yes, exactly. Because it's a quiet time anyway. It's a dead time. And by the way, you hit March. When we called the .com bust in the Trends Journal, it's there at our website, trendsjournal.com, right out of the Trends Journal, it's there. In October of 1999, we said the .com bubble was going to burst by the second quarter of 2000. So it's right in that, it burst in March of 2000. So that's the kind of time when they do these things. So yes, I believe tapering's they're going to have to do it at some point. They have to. And I believe it's going to be next year.
And, they had a 1,000-point drop back in, June or July, when he just first started hinting at this, and the market, boom, 1,000 points. And what happens to, the economy if they do taper? I mean, are they just going to grit their teeth and drag it into the ground? And, are banks going to go under? Are the markets going to go under? I mean, is everything going to go haywire? The derivatives, the interest rates derivatives are then, 4 banks have, 200+ trillion in derivatives, and most of which are interest rate derivatives. I mean, we have this 10.8 trillion in deposits and 33 billion, according to the FDIC, of insurance. What happens to the system, in the next 5 or 6 months, or when they decide to taper?
Well, you're going to see a market crash, and of course the bond issue that everyone's mostly concerned about really becomes real. When interest rates go up, that whole thing explodes. And they're going to have to go up at some point. You cannot have these record low interest rates forever. So yeah, you're going to see, my estimate is that you're going to see, when they start tapering, panic on the streets, and you probably see a 20% correction or more. But 20% is the number that I'm looking at. That always seems to fit in pretty well with these kind of things, 27, 20. And again, the bond market is the big one to look at. We saw the problems that already started happening with it when they were just, when so many people thought that tapering was going to become a reality because interest rates started going up. So when interest rates go up, the bond bubble bursts. It's as simple as that.
We had Eric Sprott as a recent guest, and he pointed out something. He says, well, interest rates went up, but you have to keep in mind, they were printing massive amounts of money, and the Japanese bought $50 billion in bonds, and in treasuries, in the 10-year treasury still went up. He says, so they couldn't raise it, they couldn't taper, because interest rates would have spiked to the roof if they would have. And so my question to you, and a lot of people are thinking, well, 20%, well, couldn't the system just implode? Couldn't we have a systemic failure if this thing gets out of hand?
Of course we could. And again, you had mentioned what FDR did when he called a bank holiday back in 1933 in March. It was a systemic failure. And when you have people like the brilliant Larry Summers, you always have to say brilliant anytime you say Larry Summers' name. And one of the reasons they're saying that he was not selected as Fed chairman was because he was opposed to the continuation of tapering. And there's nothing that Larry Summers has done financially that I would agree with, particularly, he's the guy that, Greg Palast shows those, he's a brilliant, investigative reporter and an economist showing how the game was already rigged with those memos that were going back and forth with Summers. This is a guy that was part of the team that deregulated Glass-Steagall and made the whole derivatives game possible. So when you see a guy like Larry Summers coming out and questioning the validity and efficacy of tapering, you know that this thing isn't working at all. So yes, Greg, you're 100% correct. We face a systemic failure. My belief, however, is the way they'll get around it is simply through a devaluation of the currency, because that's all they're doing now already. So that would make it official if there's some kind of a crisis. It could be a terror crisis, false flag or real. It could be a war. It could be a natural disaster. It could be a man-made disaster. It could be anything. Anything for an excuse to devalue the currency. To me, that's the way they're going to buy their way out of this And that's why I still buy gold, even though prices have been soft. I'm in it for the gold in my golden years, because I cannot see any value in owning any of these paper currencies that they just keep printing. And by the way, look what's going on over there in China. They have a real estate bubble that they cannot stop, no matter how hard they try. And we saw with China in the beginning of this year, they said that they were going to start reining in the excessive loans and easy money policies. And as soon as the economy started to go down, they reversed, and they're doing the same exact thing here as they're doing in China as they're doing in the United States. They just speak a different language, but it's QE.
So, what would this devaluation? Could the devaluation come along with a bank holiday, as Roosevelt did, FDR did in the 1930s? Could you wake up? They got 10.8 trillion on deposits. You know they don't have the cash to hand out the money. They got 33 billion of insurance. I mean, what would that look like? Would you wake up one day and say, "Hey, you've got 10,000 of the old dollars in the bank, and now you have 1,000 new dollars"? I mean, what is that going to look like? What's your vision for this?
That's exactly it. Remember, that's what FDR did, but they did it differently. But the result was the same. In those days, the dollar was pegged to gold, and before he called a bank holiday, holiday, you can't get your money out. Orwell couldn't have made up a better word, holiday. Anyway, the dollar was pegged to gold, and it was pegged at what? I think it was what, $20 or $22.60-something cents?
2067. That's why that's why a $20 gold piece is 0.967 or 975. It's not quite an ounce, a $20 gold piece, because they had to make up for that 67 cents.
So it's pegged to $20, and so for every dollar, you got $20.67 worth of gold. Yep. And they called a bank holiday.
For every ounce. For every ounce, 2067.
I'm sorry. So for every ounce of gold, right? So now they call a bank holiday, and they repeg the dollar to gold. And they repegged it. Now it's going to cost you $35 for an ounce of gold. So you just lost 70% of your purchasing power. But they never talk about that in college. I mean, I suffered through Economics 101 and on and on and on. They never taught me that. That's the kind of devaluation schemes. So they'll make up another one. They'll devalue the currency just as they did during the Great Depression. They never talk about the currency devaluation that took place under FDR. It'll be the same thing again.
So
but
you think
maybe it'll be the enemy attacked us, the banks are closed, they hate our freedom and liberty, and now, in order to save the nation, we have to take these harsh measures in protecting the American people. They'll make up some story. They'll bring in a Hollywood script writer, and they'll lay out a line of baloney. Remember, politics is show business for ugly people. So they get a show business guy to write the script. The details don't mean anything.
And so do you think they'll confiscate gold as they did in the 30s, or do you think that, well, because it's not really, the gold's not really in the monetary system, and we don't have a $20 gold piece anymore unless it's an antique or a numismatic coin, so we don't really, the banks don't hold gold pieces. So would they confiscate gold, or would they confiscate some gold? Would they confiscate mines? Would they confiscate all the foreign gold held at the Fed? Or how do you envision, what do you think would happen to gold? A lot of people are afraid of confiscation. Do you think that's a coming trend?
I don't.
Why?
I don't see that happening as it did the last time, because of the very issue that you made. The dollar isn't pegged to gold. So I don't think they're going to deal with it on that level. They'll just devalue the currency. They don't need a reason. And so the last reason was gold. This time it doesn't exist. But you know what I say? I've learned twice. I learned that when 9/11 happened, and again, I was prepared for it. I've been writing about it, false flag or real, however it happened, it happened. Whatever happened that day, the fact is the World Trade Center came down, explosion happened at the Pentagon, and I'm a New Yorker. I didn't know if they were going to whack Indian Point power plant, nuclear power plant, which is just 45 miles north of Ground Zero. So I was ready to get out of here. and I had my guns, gold, and a getaway plan. But I had money in CDs, and I tried getting it out of the bank, and I couldn't because Wall Street was closed. That was the first lesson I learned. Unless you have your money in your pocket, you got nothing. The second lesson I learned was when John the Slime Corzine, the head of the
MF Global.
MF Global, yeah, MF, you know what that stands for, right? And when they robbed me and went into my segregated account, I wasn't trading gold. I was buying it for future delivery. And they took my money. So I realized in those two instances that if you don't have it, you don't own it. Just like you saw in Cyprus. That's the kind of thing that they'll do. That's where the confiscation comes in. If you have it in their possession, you're going to get nothing, or get pennies back on the dollar, as the Cypriots did, who had anything over 100,000 euros.
You know, you live up in New York, and they have some pretty harsh gun laws. And, you know, I just thought, this is my last question to you. Would you consider moving to a state where the gun laws are more liberal, like North Carolina or Texas or South Carolina? I mean, in New York, if you shoot somebody breaking into your house, you're going to jail. You need to, if you're on a 15th floor, you need to crawl out the fire escape. This is, you know, Bloomberg's world in New York City. In New York State, I mean, you can't protect yourself inside your own home. Would you? Do you think that's a trend where the gun laws are going to be tougher all over the country, or tougher in some parts of the country, or what do you think is going to go on with that?
I don't think the gun laws are going to get any tougher than they are now, and that's not enough to make me leave. You know, I just, you know, I'm in colonial Kingston, New York. I literally a stone's throw from my right hand is the most historic corner in the United States. Where the only place on each corner where there's a stone building that predates the Revolutionary War. And over to my left, virtually a stone's throw away, is the 1777 Senate House, where New York was actually formed as a state. There's a revolutionary spirit here. This is really a free-thinking zone. And I'm very comfortable here. And my belief is that if this is where the first American Revolution had a lot of its roots, I would like to see the second one. But very clear, not one of violence, but a spiritual, moral, and intellectual revolution. And that's why I'm here in colonial Kingston.
Gerald Celente, publisher of the Trends Journal. Gerald Celente, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Always wonderful being on with you, Greg.